Good morning, everyone. Welcome to NIDA's second international conference. The panel discussion, this session, has a very long title, but it needs to be long because it needs to encompass every sector of our society. The sub-theme is re-envisioning and redesigning knowledge in the areas of environment, governance, economics, and society in order to achieve sustainable development. We're very fortunate to have a wealth of knowledge among our panelists who have a great deal of expertise in various sectors, which is appropriate for such a diverse topic area. We will start off with the energy sector, which is crucial and features prominently in any discussion of sustainability and resilience, as Dr. Supachai mentioned. If we look at the statistics, Thailand ranks 9th as a country most affected by climate events. But if we look at the capacity to deal with these risks and challenges, Thailand ranks about 39. And so it's very crucial that we have policies that would move the economy. We need to redesign, we need to re-envision our past policies. And the ability to transform would be crucial in our success as a country. A significant proportion of our industries, about 30%, still use fossil fuels. And this would require a great deal of transformation on the production side. So it's very fitting that our first speaker is Dr. Praipon, who is an expert on energy policy. As he was introduced, he was the former dean of the Faculty of Economics at Thammasat University. He was assistant to the Minister of Energy and Environment as well. And so he has a great deal of expertise in this area. So over to you, Dr. Praipon, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Ajahn Sri Laksana, and good morning, everyone. I will focus my talk on, as Ajahn Sri Laksana mentioned, on energy-related sustainability development. In particular, development that is related to climate change. All right, and I want to make 3 points. Point number one. Point number one has to do with the need or the urgency for the world to deal with climate change. And this is very important. This year, we've heard news about record-breaking heat waves and wildfires in different parts of the world. Even when we are meeting today, right now, there's still some wildfire in Canada and in some parts of the world going on. And that has a lot to do with the climate change. Actually, according to the UN Secretary General, it is no longer a problem of global warming. It's a problem of global broiling, right? The world is broiling. In fact, it's not only warming, it's getting hotter and hotter. And my personal note is that I just came back from Iceland. Iceland, where, you know, the name implies that the land is full of ice. But when I went there, people told me that most of the ice on the glaciers will disappear within less than 50 years. So that will be, and that's mainly affected by climate change. So it seems that the effects of climate change have arrived earlier than expected, and the worst is yet to come. Therefore, there's an urgent need for the world to shift immediately away from fossil fuels and to protect the forests and our biodiversity, seas and oceans. It's very important to cut greenhouse gases by half by the year 2030 and achieving net zero carbon emissions by the year 2050. And this is the goal that the world has made in terms of international agreement. So in this case, we would need better and new approaches and technologies to promote renewable energy and energy efficiency. We have in our hand a number of new and potentially beneficial technologies like energy storage, hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, or even a new kind of safer nuclear power plants. So these are technologies that we should promote. And government policies and private initiatives will both play a key role in fighting climate change. All policy tools are needed, including regulations, taxes, and subsidies. And we have to tackle both the mitigation and the adaptation of climate change to overcome this existential threat for future generations. In fact, perhaps also for our present generation as well, because as you can see, the effect of climate change is already upon us. It's already affected our lives, even today. All right, that's point number one. Point number two has to do with international cooperation. And I think this has already been mentioned by our two keynote speakers in the area of globalization. In this point, I would like to make the case that we should recognize that sustainable development challenges are global in nature. The effects of carbon emissions know no boundary. You know, when emissions occur, it will affect everyone on Earth. All countries create greenhouse gases and are affected by global warming. Developing countries can claim that greenhouse gases accumulated in the world's atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution has been largely caused by today's rich, developed countries. In fact, they have become wealthy by burning coal, oil, and gas, emitting large amounts of carbon dioxide. And now they want every country to fight global warming and climate change by relying more on clean energy, which is still more costly than fossil fuels. So it's very important to note that in order to shift away from fossil fuels, there's a cost. It's an economic cost and social cost. So it's only fair that rich countries should give financial and technical assistance to poor countries in reducing carbon emissions and in coping with climate change. So far, pledges and promises have been made by rich countries, but not enough action has been taken. It is also important that all countries should foster collaboration among themselves and to share best practices in attaining sustainable development. International cooperation in the area of climate change has improved over time with a number of conferences and agreements to reach carbon neutrality and net zero emissions. However, the present geopolitical tension is not conducive to such cooperation. So just imagine how much the world can achieve in fighting climate change by using resources to develop renewable and clean energy technology instead of using weapons to fight each other. As you can see in Ukraine, for example, sometimes it makes me wonder, what are they fighting for? Instead of using resources to fighting our common enemy, which is the climate change or the global warming at the moment. Okay, so my last point, point number 3. Sustainable development requires breaking down the traditional silos between disciplines and collaborating among diverse fields such as environmental sciences and other sciences, economics, sociology, political science, and others. This interdisciplinary approach can help us better understand complex environmental, social, and economic issues and to develop integrated solutions. I'm glad to know that in the afternoon sessions in this conference, there will be papers presented in different disciplines, and I hope there will be some kind of interdisciplinary or integration of these disciplines in order to lead to some answers or some solutions to fight the problem of climate change and sustainable development. Also, we should move away from short-term thinking and consider long-term implications of our actions. And to consider long-term implications of our actions. Now, these involve assessing the potential impacts on future generations and ensuring that decisions made today do not compromise the ability of future generations to meet their needs, or in fact, the ability for them to survive even. And these are the 2 points that I would like to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Praiporn. Dr. Praiporn ended emphasizing the interdisciplinary approach. And actually on our panel, we have a great deal of diverse disciplines represented here. Our next speaker will be Professor Sun-Yuk Kim from Korea. And we are very eager to hear about Korea's redesigning and re-envisioning how to deal with the urgent problems of climate change and sustainability. Professor Kim has both experience in academia as well as in advising governments. He has been on the President board for a great deal of policy issues. And so we're very eager to hear how Korea has conceptualized sustainable development and what concrete measures Korea has taken as an example to our countries in the region. Professor Kim, please.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And I'd like to also thank the organizers, particularly President Thipawan, for inviting me for this very important and timely conference. I think I will give you an overview of sustainable development in South Korea. But I think, of course, this case selection of South Korea is biased because I'm from Korea and I teach in Korea. But I think the two keynote speeches actually served as a very good prelude to the case of South Korea, because South Korea, as the previous presenter, Professor Yu from Beijing mentioned, is one of those two economies, and actually the only country that moved from this poorest status in the early 1960s to the high-income country right now. So I think it might interest a lot of intellectuals as well as policymakers in the developing countries how South Korea did that. And it's also related with this comment, I think, by Dr. Supachai about core-periphery dichotomy and how we eventually migrated from the peripheral status to the core status in global development in the post-war era. And what I want to emphasize in this presentation is that we can talk about generalities, we can talk about abstract ideals about sustainable development, but eventually it will depend on how different countries understand, conceptualize, and define, and operationalize the concept of sustainable development, how they actually organize that concept into specific policies, programs, and how they mobilize societal forces to carry out those policies and programs. And I'd like to talk about the case of South Korea, because South Korea really showcases the importance of political dynamics, internal political dynamics, and the way I think different social actors interact with each other to make a consensus on this important concept of sustainable development, and what to do about sustainable development in terms of normative prescriptions and policy programs. So let me first begin with the definitions. And we all know that, this is one of the global definitions out there. Development that meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So this definition emphasizes intergenerational justice in some sense, and intergenerational consensus and balance between different generations. As compared with that, I think Korean conceptualization of sustainable development, I think we skip the intergenerational part a little bit and emphasize another balance, that is to say, sustainable economic growth, inclusive society, clean and stable environment, that is to say, economy, society, and environment, and that balance. And this should be sustainable and achieve harmony and balance. So I think as compared with this globally available definition, we emphasize these three pillars of sustainable development as the main components of sustainable development. Now, let me briefly introduce the history of sustainable development in South Korea. What's interesting about the case of South Korea is that, we had this presidential initiative, presidential emphasis on sustainable development, and that is why we created quite early in 2000 this Presidential National Commission on Sustainable Development. So I think we started all right. And we had the first national strategy and implementation plan in 2006. And we legislated the Framework Act on Sustainable Development in 2007. So far, I think everything went all right. But look at what happened in 2008. Under a different president, we kind of demoted this Framework Act on Sustainable Development into just Act on Sustainable Development. That's a demotion of this. It's not Framework Act. Framework Act is a higher kind of status of the law. And we demoted it. And also this National Commission, our National Commission, was no longer under president, but it was just under the Ministry of Environment. So that happened. And what happened afterwards is that after we published several basic plans in 2011, 16, and 2022, last year there was another important reversal of the policy, so to speak, because we revived or reenacted Framework Act on Sustainable Development eventually, and we also restored or reinstated Presidential National Commission on Sustainable Development. So I think we have come to some kind of normalcy right now, and we have this reinvigorated push or drive towards sustainable development in South Korea. And that also explains a lot about this dependency of the issue of sustainable development on specific administrations, because all different administrations have differing levels of commitment to sustainable development and the policy orientation about that sustainable development. And regarding, I think, this Presidential National Commission on Sustainable Development, which was just reinstated, I'm doing some consulting work for this commission and how that commission should be organized, how the commission can be operated more effectively, and so on. I think a lot of things I wrote down here, but this commission is largely focused on including a lot of different the multi-sectoral participants, stakeholders from different sectors, and it also advises the drafting of the basic strategy and also implementation plans of different central government and local governments, and coordinating all this. So this is some kind of coordinating unit in the South Korean government that coordinates not only interministerial coordination in the central government, but also between the central government and local governments, so intergovernmental coordination as well. So this is a kind of control tower of that coordinating job in South Korean government, all right? And I think I illustrated here some progress in terms of the 17 SDGs. And I think what I want you to pay attention to is that I think all the other indicators are going relatively well. I'd like to highlight number 5 here, gender equality, which is a task for South Korea to go further. Women are still underrepresented in managerial positions, in leadership positions in South Korean governments. Women accounted for 30%, slightly over 30% of local council persons in 2022, but there has not been a single woman elected as the head of an upper level local government like governors or city mayors. Only 3.1% for municipality heads are women. So we have a long way to go in terms of gender equality. And regarding, I think, reduced inequalities, we have made some progress about decreasing the socioeconomic inequalities. But the COVID-19 hit particularly hardly the vulnerable populations in South Korea, so we have something to do in reduced inequalities as well. And we have something to do also in life below water, life on land. And particularly the disturbing aspect of this SDGs is also the 16th task, which is peace and justice. I think in terms of the internal public safety, South Korea is doing very well. But in terms of this overall peace between the two Koreas on the Korean Peninsula, I think we have, obviously, as you know, we have a long way to go. And I'd like to ask your attention for this last goal, partnerships for the goals. That is to say, multi-sectoral collaboration, intersectoral collaboration. South Korea has a long way to go because sustainable development has been so far the government's job, and unilaterally, without necessarily involving a lot of participation of the civil society sector and governmental sector. And if I put South Korea in comparative perspective, according to Sustainable Development Report this year, Korea ranked 31st overall among all the countries evaluated. So I think it is not doing very well. But particularly worrisome aspect is that it ranked 53rd in terms of government efforts. So still we need more government efforts to improve the standing. We are even lagging behind Thailand on this aspect. And the problem I think I already mentioned briefly about this demotion of the commission and the demotion of the related act, related law. But I mean, we need some kind of institutional and policy continuity across different governments. South Korea is a very polarized society, politically speaking, between conservatives and progressives. We need some more continuity across governments over the years. And also, I think as a country that moved from this low income status in the early 1960s to high income status right now, I think South Korea needs to link these sustainable development efforts with international development cooperation efforts as well. So as a country that moved from low-income country to high-income country, I think South Korea has that mission as well. We also need to promote more cooperation between different governments in terms of intergovernmental cooperation. As I already mentioned, stakeholder engagement from other sectors should be more emphasized. And the last thing I want to highlight is this legacy of the developmental state. I think Professor Yu from Beijing mentioned this facilitative role of the state in terms of economic development and economic management. South Korea is a model case of whatever you call it, developmental state or facilitative state. I think that role has been served very well in South Korea. But now we need to move beyond the developmental state, this development emphasis, almost development obsession. Beyond that, we need to pursue these balanced goals related to sustainable development and achieve, I think, globally contribute to the achievement of sustainable development as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim. I think one really important factor that Professor Kim mentioned is the demotion and the promotion of commissions and changing of the laws that seem to be a very strong driving force for change. And maybe we can revisit that in the context of other countries as well. Whether changes in the legal structure, the changes in law have resulted in significant changes in policy and measures. Professor Kim also mentioned that gender equality is also a challenge, remains a challenge in Korea. And so our next speaker is an expert on gender equality. Our next speaker, Dr. Dewi, will focus on reproductive health. She works or has a program in leadership and policy innovation at the Center for Population and Policy Studies. And so she is in a very apt position to talk about reproductive health and gender-based violence. We're very eager to hear your thoughts on that. Dr. Dewi, please.
Thank you for your introduction, and thank you to Professor Tipawan for inviting me. And my discussion today will center around how to meet the global target for SDGs while taking into account the local context. In other words, how do we read the statistics and being able to meet the goals and at the same time taking into account what's going on at the local level. So Professor Kim mentioned about target goal number 5, but here I'm going to concentrate on the child marriage and also the harmful practices. In this sense, I'm going to talk about gender-based violence, but my focus here will be the adolescents. And why the adolescents? Because in Indonesia, the adolescents have a lot of unmet needs in reference to the reproductive health. Indonesia is a predominantly Muslim country and it's growing increasingly conservative. And we have these reproductive health policies that focus on married couple because according to the normative discourse, nice adolescents don't have sex before marriage. So nice adolescents, good adolescents don't get pregnant before marriage, and obviously that's not the case at all. Okay, so there is a discrepancy between what people think or what people like to think, and the current development. The first speaker talked about how we are increasingly connected, and the connection can happen at the national level, not necessarily at the international level, because even when we talk about very remote areas, everybody has access to the internet. A lot of people have smartphones, so they can easily find information that are related to reproductive health through the internet. So the reason why I focus on the adolescents is because they have least agency. So borrowing the words from the first keynote speaker, they are the voiceless. So this is the group of people who need champions, to make sure that their needs are being met. And furthermore, adolescence is a very difficult phase in our life, because they go through a lot of changes, not just physical, but also psychological, and there are a lot of expectations that are related to the adolescents that are probably different than what people expect from them, from children. And in Indonesia, there are different definition of who the adolescents are, and this makes policy practices more difficult, because people really are not sure which type or which bracket it's bracket we're talking about. But some of the national survey use the definition of the Indonesian National Board of Family Planning that categorize those who are 10 to 24 years old as adolescents. And the percentage of adolescents in Indonesia in 2015 is more than a quarter, whereas according to the newest population census, about 28% of the Indonesian population are adolescents. Child marriage in Indonesia is quite rampant, and the drivers of child marriage are varied. First of all, there is this issue of poverty. When families are poor, child marriage is appealing, because when the children get married, the parents don't have to worry about them. Okay, there is the assumption that the husband will take care of the girls and not the parents anymore. And then there's this cultural aspects of getting married. Everybody is expected to be married. And, better yet, if they married young, because parents are worried that their daughters will grow up to be spinsters. And then, like I said earlier, there is lack of sexual education, because there is this assumption that good, decent adolescents don't have sex, they're not interested in sex, and that's why we don't have decent sexual education. It's very complicated, because sexual education, when organization or school have sexual education, people think that these institutions encourage young people to have sex outside of marriage. So it's difficult. And so what happened when adolescents get pregnant before they get married? Well, they marry the kids, as an exit strategy. And then there's this legal loophole, in the sense that, according to the marriage law, people cannot get married before the age of 19, unless there is specific conditions, such as the kids get married before the kids get pregnant before pregnancy. So this is a very usual case when the parents plead to the legal institution to allow them to marry the kids, so that they don't have to worry with the embarrassment. So marry the kid, they get married, they have kids. So this is why we have kids having kids. Okay, so as I said earlier, there is a lack of information in reference to reproductive health, and you can see here that teachers do play a lot of role in explaining what puberty is like, but increasingly young people rely more and more on the internet, and because of that, they don't always get the right information. And one thing that is alarming is that a lot of young people don't even know when the fertile period is. So this is quite concerning, because then they will have sex without understanding the repercussion of their action. Okay, and so a lot of people rely on their friends, and this is because during the adolescence period of time, people have more trust on their friends rather than compared to the parents or the teachers. And it's interesting too to see that they think that the ideal age at first birth for a woman is relatively healthy, at least from their from the ideal perspective, but this doesn't stop them from having sex when they are very young. So there is a discrepancy between people who agree about having premarital sex and people who think that virginity is still important. So these are two things that is hard to reconcile. People expect young women to stay virgin until they get married, but at the same time, there is a great push for them to have sex before marriage. Okay, and it's also very worrisome that the first age of having intercourse is sometimes as young as 10 to 14. Yeah. Because of lack of sexual education, they don't use precaution when they have sex before they get married, and that obviously can lead to pregnancy, which later on leads to child marriage. Like I said earlier, this is the exit strategy for those who get pregnant before marriage, because it's a big taboo in Indonesia, to get married outside of, to get pregnant outside of marriage. So people understand that in order to achieve, hang on one second. So this is the target, the SDGs target is 6.94% of child marriage. The key is with intervention, and sometimes putting intervention in places is not always easy because people don't work together, at the societal level or at the organizational level. Some parents don't even want to talk about reproductive health with their kids because they feel embarrassed, probably because their parents never talk about such thing with them. So they don't really have any ideas what to talk about. So at the community level, people have been questioning about this one-size-fits-all family. So, okay, we're going to have these reproductive health classes through biology, for example, or through the curricula in religious studies. Okay, so then a lot of people work together to understand what is it that makes curricula or that makes reproductive health classes difficult. And part of the problems is the resistance from the religious community. So in some places they embrace the religious leaders and talk about what is it, how is the best way to move forward so the kids will understand what to do in reference to the reproductive health. Because this normative of religious discourse makes people feel complacent about reproductive health. People think that if their kids are not going anywhere, they stay in their room, they are going to be safe. No, that's really not the case at all, because they can access all kind of information from the internet. Yeah? Okay, so, and then moving on to the violence against women. This is quite rampant in Indonesia still. The newest national survey on women's life experience states that adult women experience 11.3 11.3 adult women in Indonesia experience at least once violence throughout their lifetime, whereas during the 12 months, the past 12 months, about 3.7 women experience from intimate partner violence. This is one of the progress that the Indonesian civil society made, and we were all very proud about this, that we have finally, after 10 years of battle, had sexual violence bill that was passed in April 2023, and it criminalized, or it bans actually forced marriage, because child marriage and forced marriage can be similar or even the one. And also the most important thing, that it also requires law enforcement to go through sensitivity training. I mean, how do you actually implement the bill if a lot of people don't understand what sexual violence, what violence is, and how to deal with it? Yes. But as I said earlier, it's important to have law, but we also need to understand about the drivers. You know, what are the drivers of violence? And it can happen at so many different levels. So to conclude, I would say that it's important for us to understand context. We understand context by using a lot of national survey, but sometimes people forget that qualitative data are also data. People rely too heavily on the quantitative data. We cannot understand what's going on at the grassroots level if we don't look at the qualitative data. The lower down you go, I mean, there's data at the national level, but sometimes the data at the national level cannot really explain what is going on at the grassroots level. So we have to go down. How? By looking at what kind of data that are available, that are collected locally. You know, even though the study can be small, and then we cannot generalize the study to the entire country, but it's still very, 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 very useful to see those kind of studies. And like I said earlier, there's this contention between normative and policy discourse. Yes, we need policy discourse, but if we don't understand the normative discourse, sometimes we cannot implement policies successfully. Yes, and the third, increasing conservatism means stronger normative discourses. And one thing that I would like to highlight here is there are real people behind those numbers. We have all of the SDGs target, but we also need to highlight, to understand that those numbers that consist a lot of real people, those real people also have needs that need to be addressed, and sometimes we don't deal with the needs and the well-beings of those people because we are so concerned about meeting the numerical target. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dewi. Dr. Dewi has given us a very clear example of the discrepancy that can exist between religious values, cultural norms, as well as, and between the gap between these norms and reality, and has shown us that sometimes the legal framework, the cultural framework, the society values can be an impediment rather than a facilitator. But someone who doesn't rely on government rules or laws is Mr. Christopher Moore, who I might say is a representative of civil society. He has written several books that emphasize justice, values, human rights, and implications of those of technology on society and human existence. Please, Mr. Moore, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you to the organizers of this conference at NETA. And in particular, thank you, Dr. Siwat, for arranging for the invitation for me to speak as a member of this very august panel. And I want to say that NIDA, with its opening ceremony, really set up the stage for my presentation, for which I'm grateful. First of all, just the name of the conference, New Frontier. We are at a new frontier, and I want to talk about that in terms of storytelling in a moment. But the other part of what NIDA gave to me as a gift today was this wonderful performance of the Ramayana, which all of us were able to witness. This is the ultimate form of storytelling that has been handed down generation to generation, that we learn that there is an equilibrium that every generation must seek to obtain. And that equilibrium is really part of the great Ramayana story. You have Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the protector, and Shiva, the destroyer. And when we're dealing with climate change, we need to keep in mind all three of these characters as part of the ongoing story. So the theme of my presentation is the importance of storytelling as a way of conveying where we are in terms of climate change as a society, locally and globally. Let me give you a little bit of background of my own storytelling career. Since 1985, I've published 27 novels, and most of those novels are the stories of ordinary people living in Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Myanmar. My fiction and nonfiction books have been translated into 13 languages, and in Thailand, I've written books about Thai culture, including Heart Talk, 750 Jai phrases, and I've written a book called The Cultural Detective, which is an expat's exploration of Thai culture from a detective's point of view. And my last novel, which is Dance Me to the End of Time, is about the impact of climate change in Thailand, set in the immediate future. I also wrote radio dramas for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation and NHK in Japan, which focused really on social justice, the incarceration, internment of Canadian Japanese during World War II. And before I started this storytelling career, I was a tenured law professor at the University of British Columbia, and I wrote legal textbooks, and also I worked as a lawyer. So in both academic pursuits and as a lawyer, I understand very well the power and the importance of storytelling. If you are going to tell a story on behalf of a client, it better be a good one. So I've tried to bring these various qualities and experience to Changing Climate, Changing Lives, which is the film festival which I set up 4 years ago in Thailand. And it had one important mission, which is to engage young Thai filmmakers to go into their community and to find stories of impact of climate change in those communities, and to reveal the reaction of those local communities. How have they been able to cope? How have they mitigated? How have they shown resilience? And over the last 4 years, I've had the opportunity to work with many of these young filmmakers, and I have found that they are the one contingency of our society that needs to have a voice. Dr. Supichai alluded earlier about the importance of the voiceless people. Part of the voiceless people are young people because they don't have the connections. They're still at school. They still have a life ahead of them. So they have an important aspect to play in the climate change story, in particular in making those stories happen. They're the most likely to suffer the worst effects of climate change, which the scientists tell us that are going to lie ahead in the future. So our storytelling is part of what our species has done from the very beginning. We've painted stories on the walls of caves, and we've recorded our experiences, our events, our conflicts, our relationships with each other. And we have been handed down from some of the great authors of all times the importance of storytellers. Plato tells us those who tell the stories rule society. Ursula K. Le Guin, a famous science fiction writer, wrote, "There have been great societies that did not use the wheel, but there have been no societies that did not tell stories." Climate change is the ultimate story of our time. It's the story that needs to be told. It's the story that we will be judged by future generations. Were we up to telling the contemporary Ramayana epic story of climate change that will influence policymakers, change government, change corporate policies, and fundamentally change the kind of economic and political and social systems that we currently have. So what I'd like to be able to do is to show a video, which is number 2, which will give you a little bit of an idea of the CCCL program. Okay. I guess I'm not getting the video feed, but I will go on and then just say that we do film tours. Our film tours takes us into the schools and universities and civil society throughout Thailand. We've gone there to show our films, to address climate change issues, and to take questions from students and to help and mentor students to make climate change films. We also have had quite a good success over the last few years with international awards coming from our young student filmmakers. We've won awards in Washington, at Seattle Film Festival, and at Yale with UNESCO, and in Bangkok. So our films are getting international recognition, which is an important part of our program, is to encourage other students, other people in the region and in the world to take climate change storytelling as a part of the climate change discussion. And we're up against a bit of a battle. As everyone in this audience will know, there are climate change deniers. There are those who want to tell stories that are filled full of misinformation or disinformation about the current state of affairs. Now, part of the problem with storytelling is, I'm certain everyone here will understand, because you will tell many stories throughout the day to one another and to your family and to your friends and to your colleagues. Part of the problem with storytelling is getting attention of the audience. Google recently did a study of mobile traffic. This was in 2016. 53% of users abandoned a website if it took longer than 3 seconds to upload. In other words, the amount of patience that people have to start a story is 3 seconds. That's not a very great amount of time. It's not very encouraging for any storyteller to say, you've got 3 seconds, and if I don't feel engaged by you in 3 seconds, I'm going back to my screen and I'm going to click elsewhere and find a story that I like better. So the reality is storytelling is an environment where attention is not stable, it's fragile, it's fickle. So we need to be able to find a way to tell stories that bring notions of wisdom from the past into the present and to project where we're going into the future. Now, what we really need is a number of stories and a number of storytellers, because there's no one simple story to tell in climate change. As my panelists have alluded to, there are stories involving extreme weather, drought, wildfires, problems with the ocean. As we know, El Nino is causing a huge problem at the moment. There's melting of Antarctica, Greenland, Iceland, and the Arctic ice caps that we very much depend upon. So how do we go about presenting these stories? Well, first of all, it seems to me the stories are so complex and involve so much science that it puts a lot of people off, quite frankly. A lot of the stories that are being told are stories that if you understand high level of math, you can follow. You can follow the graphs, you can follow the statistics, and the people in this room who are educated or from academia, that is the environment that we are and you are most comfortable with. But most people are not comfortable with mathematical scientific modeling. What they want in a storyteller is something that touches their heart. Goes back to my book on Heart Talk. The Thais have 750 phrases which incorporate Jai in them. When we engage with our heart, we remember that story. If it doesn't engage our heart, 3 seconds later, we're on to something else. So storytelling to me is a bridge between the scientific data and the scientific world and the world in which 99% of the population lives, which is outside of that data, that expertise, information that is out there for the professionals to deal with. And I think this is part of the reason that we've had trouble bringing home the message of urgency in regard to climate change, is that we have not been able to tell the story that breaks through the 3-second model. So that's the first barrier. The second barrier of storytelling was, I was not there. I had someone leave a comment on a post that I made a week or so ago, and their reply was, doesn't affect me, I wasn't there. 3 seconds to get their attention, and then in that 3 seconds you have to be able to engage them. You are here. You are here now. This is happening to you. And the storytelling allows that to happen. With storytelling, you're able to feel empathy for the characters, their situation, their suffering, their hardship, and the way that they find creative solutions to the impact of climate change in their community. So you can have a mountain of data on climate change that tells us that we should be afraid, but people are not focusing on that. What they will focus on, however, is the grandmother in a rural village with a tear coming down as she's looking at what was a rice field that is no longer a field of a landscape that will sustain a crop of rice. That tear is something that moves us, that we remember. It's also that tear that makes you say, I am there. I understand what you feel because I feel it too. So with climate change storytelling, we're at a point where we have no precedent in our storytelling history for a planetary story about the entire Earth being subject to catastrophic events. And each community, each locality has its own version of this story. It's like we all have our own version of the Ramayana. We'll have our own version of the Brahma and the Vishnu. So what I'm hoping is that in the future, as we progress from CCL, that we will go from over 1,000 short films that have been submitted, that we'll have thousands more in the years to come, and that we've screened over 80 films from 15 countries, and we've funded 42 short film projects, and we've supported 46 filmmakers and 19 young artists. We've created our archive. We're taking these archives and the films and our young filmmakers into the school systems in Thailand, and we hope to be able, in the next year or two, to be able to take this program into Indonesia, the Philippines, Cambodia, and elsewhere, so that the youth in those places will be able to have a forum that they can call their own for their local stories, to engage the curiosity and imagination of the policymakers. And that's where our hope lies. Our hope lies is in the well-told stories from our youth, and I hope that CCCL will be part of this dialogue and part of the storytelling future that will help us give hope to a generation that is feeling very anxious at the moment as to where things are going. I want to thank you very much for giving me more than 3 seconds of attention. I hope that I've put you there, and I hope that you will come to our film festival in February next year to see the next generation of films from all around the world on climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore, for showing us how hands-on engagement with youth can make a difference. Unfortunately, our technical team wasn't able to show an example of the films that Mr. Moore's group has been creating, but I think maybe after the presentation that can be, they'll have time to work on it.
Yeah, the films are there, but somehow I was unable to get them queued up. It's only a 2-minute clip. I mean, we could play it now if you want.
So actually, maybe we'll come back to that.
Come back to it,
because
okay.
we have a few minutes of discussion time, so we can come back to that, yes. So our next speaker is Mr. Tharit Panpiamrat, okay, whom we all know as a son of your father, a prominent economist in Thailand. He represents, again, a very diverse background. He's a chemical engineer turned financial expert. He has a great deal of experience in banking supervision, corporate planning, corporate strategy, and is currently the Assistant Governor of the Bank of Thailand. He will focus on Thailand's two urgent problems, inequality and sustainability. But I have to say that we've been talking about inequality and sustainability as an urgent problem for decades. So we're very anxious to hear from Mr. Tharit, who's in a position to make a change. We'd like to hear about any paradigm shifts, any redesigning, any rethinking of policy that comes out from the Bank of Thailand. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Professor. And it's a great honor to be here as part of the event. With the interest of time, I try to keep it short, but I leave presentation for your reference. As a point of view of a center banker, if you ask us what keeps us awake at night, three things will come up. The first thing is high household debt. We all know that we have very high, not very, very high, but high household debt. We do not have adequate access to finance. That will lead to income equality. That is part of the problems. And lastly, as Professor already mentioned at the earlier, that we are in danger of adverse effect from climate change. So those are three issues that are on top of our priority list. And all these are sustainability issues. If we do not prevent this, if we do not think about it, it will lead to economic instability. So that is our job, to keep economy stable. That is our purview. So our paradigm has been shifted from focusing mainly on sustainability to focusing on sustainability as well. I will go on this issue one by one. On household debt, we all know that our household debt now stands at about 90% to GDP. Part of this because of COVID-19. We see a surge in debt to GDP during COVID pandemic. That is because we know that what comes with COVID crisis is income gap. People need money to make their living, so we have to borrow. But now, as we see economy start to recover, people have more money in their pocket, things will start to get better. But there's still things remain to be done, particularly behavior of the lenders and behaviors of the borrowers. On the borrower side, we all know that Thai people, some Thais, we spend more than we saved, and we spend before we save. We spend more than we earn. So all these attitudes need to be changed. So we have a unit in the Bank of Thailand that promote financial literacy. So that will help. But we still have to deal with behavior of the lender, banks and non-banks. We already released a paper titled Sustainable Solution to Household Debt in Thailand. There are a bunch of measures to be rolled out. For example, regulation on responsible lending. From now on, some certain advertisement will be prohibited. For example, a few years ago, there is a phrase called "things must have," "ของมันต้องมี." This kind of advertisement is not good. It's nudging consumer into the wrong direction. So that's something that we will prohibit. And also, the lender will need to be responsible. They will need to offer debt restructuring program before sending the borrower into court for bankruptcy. So this is practice that we want to see more from the lender side. And also, we will, in the future, not now, we will issue debt service ratio regulation. This will prevent banks or non-banks to overlend to the vulnerable groups. And there are a series of the measures that will come out. With interest of time, you can look at the BOT website for more information. The second issue that I mentioned is part of our household still rely on informal sector loan sharks, and they will charge interest as high as 100% to 300%. Part of this group, they do have high risk, so banks do not have risk appetite to serve this group. But part of the problem is that some of households do not have sufficient footprint for banks to adequately analyze their creditworthiness. So the solution to the problem is that we are trying to create financial landscape where there are players who can serve this group better. For example, we have the personal loan service provider for personal use. We have nano finance service provider for micro SME. We see steady increase of these players over time, and it's continued to increase. And also we promote the use of alternative data to improve financial access. We already granted 6 digital personal loan license to non-bank operators. They are partnering with a non-financial firm, the like of utility company, telco, and e-commerce platform. They use this information to assess creditworthiness of the borrowers. But now the total amount of outstanding is only 7 million baht. It's still small, but it's growing. It's growing. And as you might have heard that we will plan to add a new kind of player into the landscape, the so-called virtual bank. It can be a game changer. We are planning to give license, not more than 3 licenses. Hopefully, we will have the name announced by the end of next year. The last issue that I like to mention, Professor has already covered this. We are in great danger from adverse impact from climate change. So what way we can do? In the banking sector, we can do only some certain thing, but we will do all we can do under our purview. There are 2 objectives that the Bank of Thailand set out. The first one is that we want banks to integrate ESG concern into their operation from end to end, meaning that when they underwrite a loan, they will have to take into account climate risks into their underwriting process. And in the future, they will have to disclose how they finance emission. Probably next year or the following years, they will have to start doing so. And at the Bank of Thailand, one of the key focus is that we want bank to be part of the solution. We want bank to lend helping hand to support their borrowers. So we will be asking them, particularly district bank, domestically, systemically important banks, all the big banks, to set target of the what we call scope 3 emission. I'm not sure if you are familiar with this, but it's emission from their borrowers. We want them to set a clear objective on how they will reduce the emission from borrowers. They will have to cooperate with the borrower, of course. They will have to plan together with their borrowers. And we will also be supporting them in maybe creating product and service that support the green transition, and any incentive that can support. We are already in discussion with some international organizations like ADB for some support. So these is things that financial sector can contribute. I think I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tarit, for showing us what concrete measures the Bank of Thailand has initiated. I don't know if I can ask a question, but I wonder how comprehensive it is in reaching. In terms of the household debt, you mentioned that you're trying to get information on informal lenders and household debt to informal lenders. Now, you showed the statistics that the informal lenders can charge up to 100% to 300% per year. I work in the Klong Toei slums, and I know for a fact that they charge 10% per week, which means more than 1,000% per year. I wonder if these measures that the Bank of Thailand has really initiated and appropriately initiated, would they reach money lenders and borrowers like that?
I have heard so. The 300% is average from the research, but I've heard of the case that they charge 1,000%. There are three factors contributing to this. The first one is the borrower may have a very high risk profile. They have a very low income, low and volatile income. This, I'm afraid that financial sector has a limited capacity to take care of this group. This group will have to be taken care of by other measures like grander, bigger economic policy. But what we can do is that we can introduce new type of players. As I mentioned, the virtual bank. But virtual bank will fit for those who can reach digital channel. But some people in Klong Toei might not be that focus group. Hopefully, what we have seen right now is non-banks like of personal loan, nano finance. They're operating on the high street. Small shops, small lender shops. I think those will play important role in serving the group that you mentioned. They can charge 23% or 33% up to the type of license, and we see this type of players growing. Hopefully, this will play some role in serving the unserved.
Thank you very much. I think maybe Mr. Moore can help in this regard with your reach to vulnerable groups and communities. But at this moment, I think the technical team has your video ready.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Maybe we can watch that.
Okay,
for a few minutes.
I think that would be informative
Yes.
if we could roll the video.
Can we have the video, please?
Okay. This is a video that will give you an idea of our activities and the
ก็รู้อยู่
youth.
แล้วว่าการเปลี่ยนแปลงสภาพอากาศมันเกิดขึ้นได้ยังไงใช่ไหมคะพวกหนูเลยนำเสนอจุดเล็กๆที่อำเภออมก่อยจังหวัดเชียงใหม่ซึ่งจะมีการทำเหมืองแร่กว่า 284 ไร่พวกหนูเลยอยากทำเพื่อเป็นกระบอกเสียงให้กับชุมชน
เรื่องของไร่หมุนเวียนเนี่ยมันก็คือเป็นวิธีการหนึ่งครับที่จะแบบว่ารักษาสมดุลธรรมชาติรักษาไม่ให้แบบว่าสภาพอากาศอะไรอย่างเงี้ยครับแปรปรวนเกินไปแล้วก็มันก็เชื่อมโยงกับวิถีคนอยู่กับป่าประเด็นทางสังคมแล้วก็วัฒนธรรมครับ
ผมมองว่าสิ่งแวดล้อมเองก็เป็นการเมืองเพราะฉะนั้นถ้าเกิดว่าเราสามารถทำให้เรื่องของการเมืองในหลายๆมิติมันดีได้เนี่ยมันน่าจะส่งผลช่วยอะไรกับสังคมหลายเรื่องเนี่ย
It's a really special opportunity, I think, this festival, for a new generation of artists and filmmakers to inspire us with stories about brave and industrious communities working together to build a sustainable, low-carbon future for all of us.
อยู่ข้างธรรมชาติครับธรรมชาติแบบมันไม่ค่อยมีเสียงเท่าไหร่สิ่งสำคัญของพวกเราที่เป็นคนเล็กๆที่จะทำได้เนี่ยมันคือการที่เราจะไม่หยุดยอมต่อสิ่งเหล่านี้ให้มันเกิดขึ้นการที่เรารับรู้อยู่แล้วอ่ะเราต้องไม่ปากเสียงต่อใน storyteller อย่างพวกเรานี่แหละจะเป็นคนเปลี่ยนแปลง
And there's one more very short clip of 2 films. Yeah.
ป่าแถวนี้มันสำคัญกับคนที่นี่ยังไงครับผมเห็นคนที่นี่เขาห่วงกันนักกันหนา
ว่าผู้นี้แกปะเต่ามูเนี่ยแกถ้าคือลิสองล่าเลยแล้วเขาเลิกขึ้นตอนนี้พวกพี่เลิกเลยลิเนาะว่าไม่ตุลว่าเนี่ยพวกเสียบ้าว่าละคู่ไปผู้นี้จะสิ่งอย่างปะตาบ้า
การที่เราปกป้องป่านั้นน่ะก็เหมือนการรักษาลมหายใจของคนทั้งโลกด้วย
หลายอย่างที่เกิดขึ้นกับโลซินที่เราเห็นได้ชัดเลยก็คือลักษณะของปะการังที่มันพังทลายนักวิชาการบางท่านก็ตั้งสมมติฐานว่าอาจจะเป็นเพราะพายุที่เกิดขึ้นในช่วงต้นปี 2019 แต่ว่าบางท่านก็บอกว่าอาจจะเป็นเรื่องเครื่องมือประมงหรือเปล่าที่เข้ามาทำลายปะการังในโซนนี้อย่างไรก็ตามสมมติฐานเหล่านี้มันก็มีทั้งสิ่งที่เกิดจากมนุษย์แม้กระทั่งพายุเนี่ยต่อให้เป็นพายุที่มาจากธรรมชาติสุดท้ายแล้วอ่ะธรรมชาตินั้นที่มันเปลี่ยนแปลงไปอ่ะมันก็เป็นเพราะจากเราไม่ใช่เหรออย่างเช่นการเปลี่ยนแปลงสภาพภูมิอากาศที่มันเกิดขึ้นเนี่ยทำให้ฤดูการเปลี่ยนแปลงทำให้พายุเกิดถี่ขึ้นทำให้พายุแบบไม่สามารถรู้ล่วงหน้าได้เลยแต่ว่าทุกอย่างนั้นอ่ะมันเกิดจากที่เราเนี่ยปล่อยไอ้พวกก๊าซเรือนกระจกเนี่ยไปเร่งกระบวนการของการเปลี่ยนแปลงสภาพภูมิอากาศนั้น
Thank you.
Thank you very much for those clips. I think the quality is amazing, I must say. Yes, we now invite questions from the floor, which you can ask verbally or you can write up questions. In fact, I have one question in my hand right now. It's a question to the Bank of Thailand. I suppose it means Kun Tharit. But if I may, could I answer the question initially first? The question, whether there's a way to zero household debt. The question is, what does the BOT think? I'm not sure whether zero household debt is our goal.
Zero household debt.
Yeah, I think what we might need to do is to enhance the capacity of households to repay debt. Debt is a means to finance projects, I believe. But what is your take on that, Mr. Tharit?
I'm not so sure what does it mean by zero household debt.
This is the question.
But right now, it stands at 90% high. Our objective is to bring it down to the international standard. That some of the ballpark or some of the benchmark that we have heard is about 80% to GDP. I think the policy or the issue that we will be rolling out in the future will play part in bringing down to the more sustainable level. But we will have to admit that there is a long-term structural problems. It cannot be fixed within 1 or 2 years. it will take years for this to come down. Fortunately, right now, economy start to pick up. The level of debt to GDP will naturally come down. But what we have to do is to prevent that to keep climbing up again by doing all these preventive measures that I mentioned. And there will be more details in the paper that published. Yep.
Yes, thank you very much. We have a few minutes for discussion. If there are, I know people are looking at their watches right now, but I was told by the organizers that we can delay lunch for a few minutes. So if there are any other questions that you would like to direct to our speakers, but if not, could I ask each of the speakers to have some final words or things that you feel have not been accomplished yet, and how you think we should go about accomplishing that in our respective countries, or even in the international arena? If we could start with Dr. Praipon and then go along. Some final words.
Actually, I find it very hard to add to anything, because we have very little in common in terms of the content of our presentation. But in any case,
just your own presentation.
In my own presentation, what I have not talked much about is about Thailand, in fact, because I mentioned climate change in general. But in Thailand, I must say that we have tried our best, really, but that's not enough, I would say. And I think that speaks for other countries as well, developed countries as well as developing countries, even the United States, even China, even India, European countries, Japan. They haven't done, they've done their best, but their best at the moment is not enough, I feel, because as I mentioned in my presentation, the problem is more dramatic, and it has more effect on our lives on Earth than even scientists thought it would be, the effects would be. Take this year, for example, news about heat waves, wildfire, and other effects on climate change occur very frequently and in different parts of the world, not only in vulnerable areas like Asia or Africa, but even in Europe and North America even. So you can see that the problem is more urgent than that we thought. And this is very important for everyone on Earth. So countries must do more, I think, and Thailand should also do more. For example, I can talk more about Thailand energy policy, but one of the weaknesses of Thailand at the moment is that we have not had a government that is ready to make and implement policies as promised in the elections, because as we all know, we are in the middle of these the selections of who's going to be a prime minister and which political parties will form a government and so on and so forth. So the interim government can't do anything that would lead to solving the problems, including problems that has to do with this sustainable development that we've been talking about. In energy, for example, we are waiting for the real government, the so-called permanent government, to make decisions on our so-called power development plan, for example, because the plan has to do with how in the future we will invest in producing electricity, using what kind of fuels. This has not been settled yet, unfortunately. The latest plan, which I totally disagree, still rely on fossil fuels for more than half of the electricity produced in Thailand in the next 20 years, which is unbelievable. And I hope your contribution in making films about climate change will urge people and the government to do more in reducing the reliance on fossil fuels. And by the way, this conference should contribute to it, because air conditioning has been running to keeping us so cold at the moment. So keeping it down will save energy. That's one thing that I would recommend. But of course, in the long run, the government should do more, not only in planning, in the energy investment, in the electricity investment, in promoting clean transport, promoting more electricity vehicles, and so on and so forth. That's what I would like to add.
Thank you very much, Dr. Praipon. Can I ask for 1 minute each from each of you? 1 minute per person.
All right. I learned tremendously from the session. I think the beauty of the session lay in the fact that we are all, I think, focused on different sector actors, you know, the government, for example, and the civil society group, and also the financial sector, bank. I think how we are all trying to enhance this goal of sustainability. I think I learned a lot from the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Dewi, 1 minute.
Okay, thank you so much. I think what I could add to my presentation is that a lot of times we have programs or policies for the adolescents, but we never ask the adolescents what is it that they want. What is it what they want in policies? So I learned a lot from him, from the storytelling. You know, perhaps if they can see the trajectory of their life through life story, they will have a better grasp, better understanding of what they need and how the policy should be to address their needs.
Thank you. Christopher, please.
Okay, I think I'm on here. I think the final message I would leave you with is we still haven't quite come to terms with the fact that nature can't be bribed, it can't be bargained with, it can't be negotiated with, it can't be controlled. It's the first time in our history where we have an adversary we can't reach a compromise with, that we can't negotiate a deal that's favorable to us. We can only issue warnings or threats to nature, but we can't control nature. That nature is not separate from our lives. This is the problem with the consumption society, is we are separated. We are in this air-conditioned room with lighting. Everything is comfortable. This cannot last. This will not last. People have to realize we are at a climate emergency situation, and that we have to deal with climate with a degree of humility that we expect from our policymakers, from those that we elect to public office, a humility that we have an adversary that we cannot control. And with that in mind, we have to make some very important concessions which are going to create unhappiness, some chaos, and some hardship, but we have no choice. And as the stories will continue to come from climate change filmmakers in Thailand, which I'm very proud to have these young Thai filmmakers step up to the challenge. They are influencing and will continue to influence policymakers in Thailand and elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Mr. Tariq, just one,
Yes,
one last thought.
I think I'd like to echo Dr. Praipon that we are way behind other countries in our initiative in tackling climate change. There are a lot of awareness, but for some agencies, there's no plan just yet how to to tackle this, and certainly not enough action being taken. So we want all of us to voice out, send our message across to the public, trying to put pressure on those in power to do more. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I ask you all, I'm getting pressure from the organizers now. So may I ask you to join me in thanking our panelists for a very fruitful discussion, which I am sure we will continue.